Hi, this is Josh Fonger, and welcome to the Work the System podcast, where we help business owners move from owning a job to owning a business, mastering their systems so that they can simplify growth. And today I have a special guest, Geoff Woods. And Geoff Woods is the vice president of The One Thing. After hearing the Jim Rohn quote that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, Geoff set out on a mission to surround himself with high-level CEOs and successful entrepreneurs. Fast forward just 10 months, Geoff went from employee to entrepreneur, launching a company with the co-owners of the best-selling book, The One Thing. Geoff has been featured in entrepreneur.com and is on a mission to teach people how to live a life of focus so they can have more by doing less. All right, so Geoff, let's start from the beginning. What's your story and how did you get into this line of work?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. I think a lot of people know what it feels like to wake up every day, and even though things may be good in their world, they feel like something's missing. That's where I was. I was in medical device sales for 5 years prior to this, which is a job I really loved. It was a great experience and very rewarding, yet I had this gap. I had always known that I wanted to wake up as a business owner, owning a massive business that made a really big impact and delivered security for my family. Yet I didn't know how to get there. And frankly, I didn't have a reason to go down that path. I had the golden handcuffs until 2 things happened in my life. Okay. A colleague of mine had a stroke when he was 35 years old. And I remember chatting with my wife. She had just given birth to our first child. We had just closed on a house in Orange County. She's a stay-at-home mom. And I'm thinking, as the sole provider, if that stroke had happened to me, what would have happened to my family? Mm-hmm. That was very unsettling. And then the next week, my company needed to make a change to our commission structure in order to remain competitive in the marketplace. And overnight, I took a 40% pay cut. Wow. Which, those 2 things back to back force you to ask some difficult questions. And as the money started to drain, because we had established a lifestyle and all of a sudden the money evaporates, you watch your bank account almost hit zero. Suddenly there was enough pain in my life to compel me to take action. And like you mentioned, I heard that Jim Rohn quote that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And looked at my 5, thought, wow, great people I absolutely want to be in my life forever. And yet I have no business seeking guidance from them because they're not where I want to be. Mm-hmm. They're not business owners making a big impact and delivering real security for their family. So I set off on a mission to make that happen. I started a podcast called The Mentee, where I recorded conversations with mentors. And before you know it, I ended up meeting Jay Papasan, who co-authored The One Thing with Gary Keller, mm-hmm. and formed a relationship. And one thing led to the next. I'm now partners with them and been tasked with turning their book into a massive training company.
And Geoff, we talked a little bit before this session about how you and I have similar stories and that we both got connected with a great author with a great message, and we've both been trying to spread that message. So you met Gary, you met Jay. What was one of the kind of first things you learned working with them, helping them grow that business?
Yeah, I think since the audience here is a lot of business owners, if I asked you, what is a job description? When you go to hire somebody, what's a job description? You think, oh yeah, all the things they have to do for the job. Gary and Jay flip it. It's not what's everything they need to do for the job. It's what are the 2 to 3 things they have to do exceptionally well. Otherwise they get fired. Okay. Right? Mm-hmm. So we had to have real clarity on what the 20% was for my role, one of which I'm interviewing for the opportunity to be the CEO of the company. I got to be able to cast a vision. And I remember having a state of the company meeting with Gary and Jay, which if you don't know who Gary Keller is, you ever heard of Keller Williams Realty? It's the largest real estate company in the world. It's that Gary Keller. Here I am fresh out of scrubs, never been a CEO of a company, and I have to sell the titan of the real estate industry on a vision and get him to sign off on my business plan, which was very intimidating. And I remember sitting down at this big conference table and I hand each of them a single sheet of paper. And on that paper were 3 priorities. Mm-hmm. The 3 things that if we just accomplish those this year would make everything else easier or unnecessary. We started talking about number 1. Gary and Jay asked a bunch of questions. I answered them. I said, we good? They go, yeah. I started talking about number 2, and Gary pretty quickly started asking more questions about number 1. I didn't think anything of it. I just answered the questions. When I thought that we were satisfied, I went back to number 2, started talking about number 3, and Gary started asking more questions about number 1, which you ever seen Meet the Parents, Josh?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know the circle of trust?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I wasn't in it. Like, why does he keep going back to number one? Jay was just sitting back. Like, I knew he knew where Gary was going with this. I was lost. All I could do was answer the questions. I asked him, are we good? He goes, yeah. I'm talking about number 3 for no more than 10 seconds. And he stops me a final time and he asks, do you need to do number 3 in order to do number 2? I said, no. Need to do number 2 in order to do number 1? I said, no. He said, do me a favor, draw a line between number 1 and number 2, or even better, rip the page in half. Don't even think about number 2 and number 3 until you've earned the right to by mastering number 1. Here's the lesson. The number 1 lie of productivity is the lie that everything matters equally. If I ask any of you who are listening to this, does checking email matter equally to engaging with your most important customers? Does sitting in meetings matter equally to coaching your top talent? No one's going to say yes to that. We all know that engaging with our best customers, engaging and coaching our top talent matters most as a business owner. And yet, if we followed you around with a camera, your activities would likely show us that your time is spent in your inbox. Your time is spent in meetings. We treat everything like it matters equally. In that moment, it was literally delivered just like accountability 2x4. You've got your most important work, and then there's everything else. And until your number 1 priority is done, everything else is a distraction.
So for the entrepreneurs watching this right now or listening to this podcast, how do you go about segmenting someone's time? Because of course they need to get those busy work things done, email, phone calls, voicemail. So what does an entrepreneur do?
Yeah, so there's a concept in the one thing called time blocking. It's the idea of scheduling time with yourself to do your most important work. Kind of like if you ever have a doctor's appointment, you put it on your calendar. If somebody asks you if you can meet during that time, you say no, because scheduling time with the doctor is a pain. Yeah. You protect that time. This is about having clarity, like back to the 80-20 rule. There's the 20% activities that are going to give you 80% of your results. Yet most people go through their day doing the 80% work, doing all the things that don't matter, and they wonder why they never have time to do the things that matter most. This is about, can you prove to yourself that you can even just move the ball on your number 1 priority before you earn the right to check your email, before you earn the right to go chat with the people in your company, before you earn the right to sit in a meeting? Can you prove to yourself that you can move the ball on your one thing first?
I like that idea of earning the right. Sometimes I set that up for folks that have a hard time procrastinating on big projects, and I let them know one of the things, one of the techniques is after you finish it, set a reward for yourself. You know you can't get that reward until afterwards, and maybe it's to spend time with your kids or to go to a date night with your wife, whatever it is. And you're like, well, I cannot do that thing I want to do until I finish this, and it kind of really forces you. Because it's difficult for entrepreneurs to hold themselves accountable if no one's there.
Yeah, I get it. Every single one of us, we have decades of habits that we have formed unintentionally. It wasn't your intention. Well, I'll ask it as a question. When you open up your computer, what's the first thing that you open on your computer?
For me personally, it's my email. Yeah, I open my email, see what's
you and the majority of people. Now, here's the question. Does your inbox reflect your priorities, or does it reflect everyone else's? It reflects everyone else's, right? Yet, how many of us have opened that email inbox first thing, and all of a sudden, like 15 minutes, a half hour has flown by. I'm like, what did we even do? And even more dangerously, you clicked on that one email and saw that there was something really challenging in there, and you said, I'm not going to handle it right now. So what'd you do? You marked it as unread. And then you went throughout your day, and it was occupying your mind share. You weren't present in that meeting. You weren't present with that customer. You weren't present with your one thing because you were thinking about that email. We asked the question, why did you even give the world permission to come into your mind first? Like subtle shift. Can you check your 411 before you check your email? 411 is a tool we use to get clarity on your priorities. Can you check your priorities before you check your inbox? That's a simple shift.
So how does this 411 work? So what is the 411? How can entrepreneurs use that tool?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, if you go to theonething.com with the number 1 in the URL, click on free stuff. It's there. Most people, when they try to figure out what they're going to do, they look at their calendar, they see it's a parking lot for everyone else's priorities. Mm-hmm. And in the time that remains, they ask the question, what should I be doing right now? And they end up reacting to whatever's urgent. This is a model for very purposefully getting clarity on what are my objectives or my goals for this year. Mm-hmm. I'm not talking the laundry list. I'm talking the true big rocks that if you just accomplished these handful of things this year would make it the most exceptional year in your life, professionally and personally. Mm-hmm. And once you get clarity on that, which by the way, getting clarity on that is going to take some work. Mm-hmm. Not exactly easy. Based on that, you ask the question, what are my priorities for this month? What are the things that the handful of true big rocks that if I accomplished them this month would make me feel like I'm on track for my year? Mm-hmm. And based on that, what are my priorities this week? So that if I just accomplish those this week would make me feel like I'm on track for my month. It's those priorities. I'm talking 3 to 5 things max that then drive your calendar. Not everything else. Most people, what we've found doing trainings is most people, when they go to plan their week, they see all this stuff that's scheduled and then they try to fit everything else in the time that remains. Mm-hmm. That's treating everything like it matters equally. What I have learned working with Gary and Jay for the last few years is if doing the most important thing is the most important thing, why do anything else? So when we look at our calendars, we have clarity on what our priorities are mm-hmm. first. Those get blocked first. Right. And anything else that's currently scheduled there has to interview to keep its spot.
Mm-hmm. That's great. It's being taking control, being proactive. Yeah. So how does this, so I know one of the key concepts in the book, The One Thing, and for those of you who have not read it, it's a great book. For those watching the video, it's right here. It's, I have notes all over this book. So what is the this idea of this domino effect? How does that play into this?
Sure. So the whole idea is that success is sequential. It's not simultaneous. It's not doing everything at the same time. It's doing one thing, the right thing at a time, over time, mm-hmm. leads to extraordinary results. And a great way to illustrate this is through Dominos. Have you ever lined up Dominos, Josh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Did you knock down each domino individually?
Yes. Yeah. One at a time.
Well, did you literally flick each one individually or did you line them up and knock one?
Yeah, just one.
Right. You knocked one domino and it knocked the rest down. Back in 2009, there was a group, Ouija Domino Productions. They broke the world record for domino falls. They lined up 4.5 million dominoes, which like I've lined up 12, right? 4.5 million.
Dedication.
Right? Huh? Now imagine standing in this massive room, temperature controlled, 4.5 million dominoes lined up, and you watch the leader of this group walk up and with a gentle flick of a finger, mm-hmm. something amazing happens. Over the course of this run, 94,000 joules of energy get released. That's as much energy as it would take you, Josh, to drop right now and do 545 push-ups. So the idea that one thing, a gentle flick of a finger can unleash that much energy mm-hmm. is a domino run. Lauren Whitehead was a researcher. He published in the American Journal of Physics back in 1983 that a 2-inch domino didn't just knock down another 2-inch domino. It could actually knock one down that was 50% larger. So if you think a 2-inch domino goes to 3 to 4.5, our team actually extrapolated this out. If you go just 18 dominoes in, that 2-inch domino would knock over the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Mm-hmm. By the 23rd, Eiffel Tower. 31st, it looms 3,000 feet above Everest. By the 57th, it reaches almost from the Earth to the moon. When you do one thing, the right thing, consistently over time, it can achieve extraordinary things. I think the challenge for most of us is we want to achieve extraordinary results. Like we think, you ever seen the Leaning Tower of Pisa in person?
No, not personally. No.
So for any of you who are listening to this, think about seeing it in person. The building's already leaning over. Just a push should knock it over, right? Yet if you were suited up in football gear and you ran full steam at that thing, do you think you'd knock it over?
No. The
answer is no. Most of us in our lives are trying to knock over the 18th domino. We have clarity on that goal, that result that we want to accomplish, and we wonder why we're not making the progress we want. It's because we're thinking big, knocking over the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and we're not going small. We're not going small enough, identifying the 2-inch domino activities in our world that if we knocked those over consistently, would scale our business, would transform our marriage, would transform our health.
So let's take a real example. So let's say someone's got a business and they want to, and their big thing is double sales, and they go through a year and sales don't double, and another year the sales don't double, and they say, I just want to double my sales. How do they determine the one thing, the domino that's going to kind of lead towards that?
Do you mind if we actually use you as an example so it can be real?
Sure. Yeah.
What is a big goal that you have been focusing on either professionally or personally, and you're not feeling like you're making the progress you want to be making?
I think the big thing for us is to fill out our marketing. That's why we're doing this right here. Fill out our marketing channels. And we've been doing a transition from Sam to myself, as Sam's been more involved in politics and I'm doing more of the work like this. And so making that shift has been our biggest challenge right now.
I'm going to repeat it back just to make sure I understand. It's, is it shifting from Sam being the face to you being the face?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to ask you the focusing question, which is, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? So Josh, what's the one thing that you can do such that by doing it would make you the face of the brand and the idea of the people who are listening to this rather than Sam?
Do podcasts.
Great.
I think that's exactly why I'm doing it. The other thing in the back of my mind is to write a book, which is on my to-do list. But this is a very simple medium to use, and that we've been using before in the past. So I love that you just gave two ideas: podcast, book. Mm-hmm. Let's ask a question. If you could only do one, what's the one that you can do that would make the biggest impact the fastest? Podcast.
Definitely. Podcast. Mm-hmm. Great. So now I feel like we're down to like a fifth domino. We need to go smaller.
Okay.
What's the one thing you can do such that by doing it would make doing podcasts easier or unnecessary?
I don't know. I have to think about that. Something I could do that would be easier than podcasts to make them unnecesswell.
Let's work through it, because this is where most people, they'll like, that's a good question. Let me go check email.
Right. Well, speaking of which, one thing we just added to make my face more the brand is change my signature line in the last 24 hours. So now it has a picture of me on it, as opposed to just work the system. Now there's a picture of me on there. So that's an element. And then another thing, which maybe complicates the issue, maybe it's part of the issue, is eventually starting a membership site where I have a deeper connection with our audience, as opposed to just blogs and podcasts, but actually a connection. So that's
great
as well.
So we just identified more things. So now I'm going to ask you a question. If you could only do one, what's the one that's going to make everything else easier or unnecessary? Podcast, email signature, or membership? What's going to make you the face of the brand in the mind share of your following?
I guess I'm going back to the podcast. I think that's probably going to be the easiest thing, because
I agree with you.
We have audio, we have video, we have the email coming out from me. I think the most important thing for people who want to work with me, either in a consulting or coaching fashion, is they want to have some kind of relationship with me first. And this seems to be the easiest medium, because even though I've been doing consulting for 10 years, most people think, well, Sam's in his 60s. He wrote the book. I'd like to work with Sam. And transferring that down to somebody my age is a bigger challenge. I think this does that through this medium.
How often would you have to, what's the minimum number of times that you can podcast in order to achieve the result you're looking for from a frequency standpoint?
Probably once a month would be the minimum.
Okay.
I'd like to do it more, but I think if I do it once a month, that would at least keep people remembering who I am.
I'm going to challenge you. I don't think that's enough, just because I know podcasting inside and out. I think you need to be doing at least once a week. Just once, or I think once a week is the minimum. That way it's consistent. My question for you is, can you do once a week?
Yeah, I recorded 4 this week and it was nothing.
Great. So what's the one thing you can do that would make recording one podcast a week easier or unnecessary?
Make it easier. Certainly making it easier would be setting up an automatic scheduler, which I just did 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
And I need to formalize the process with my team of how they process these podcasts.
Yep.
That's a newer thing on their list. So procedures.
So schedule. I'm hearing you say that having a scheduler, so you don't even have to play the back and forth game. People can just schedule with you.
Yep.
And once it's scheduled, there's actually a process.
Yep. Right now there's an automatic scheduler, but the actual post-production process is not as tight as I'd like it to be. We've switched teams in the last year. So this newer team does not have a process for it that's as tight as I would like. I think that's the one thing that would definitely make it easier in terms of me. Because now I send an email to anybody I want. They schedule it. It automatically happens. But it's the post-production I'm still too involved in.
Yeah. And we could continue going down this rabbit hole for quite some time. But the whole idea is that you keep asking the focusing question, what's the one thing I can do such that by doing it would make accomplishing X easier or unnecessary? I will tell you, having schedulers and processes in place, massive. I would encourage you to have a podcast day.
Podcast day, just a whole day.
Once a month or once every other week, that is your set interview day. That way everybody goes there, because the challenge with most podcasters is they do it entrepreneurially. They just book shows or recordings whenever. Have your day for podcasting. You get in the zone, you batch create it, you're done. You go and you run your business. And
I think that's a good segue to a topic we talked about on your podcast, which is the moving from E to P. So how does that happen? Because there's a ceiling you break through, right?
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. So we had Josh on the One Thing podcast, and there's this concept every single time, every one of us in some area of our life is hitting up against the ceiling of achievement. Mm-hmm. We keep taking massive action, yet we wonder why we're not breaking through. And ultimately it comes down to the fact that we're acting entrepreneurially, that's the E, when we could be acting purposefully. You're acting entrepreneurially when you're relying on your natural abilities. You're just waking up, you're taking massive action, you make some mistakes, you take more action, you make some mistakes. Like, that's entrepreneurially. That's how most of us act. And there is a ceiling over our achievement when you act that way. The only way you break through is when you identify models and systems that, if you put those systems into place, would automatically just help you shatter through that ceiling. And what happens to the ceiling once you shatter it? It resets to the next level, which you then have to identify the next models and systems. Podcasting as an example, a lot of people who podcast, they get their mic, they book shows whenever they have availability on their calendar, and they show up and they record and they hope it's good. That's entrepreneurial. Purposeful is having clarity on, number one, when do you podcast and when do you say no to podcasting? What is your show about? What is it not about? What are questions that you ask? What makes it great? How do you ensure that you pre-qualify people? I mean, there's all these systems that you can put in place to ensure that it's extraordinary content that people can't live without. And most people don't have it because they never put the systems in place to begin with.
So they reach the ceiling of their talent, essentially. Like, most entrepreneurs I work with are really talented, and then they delegate things, and they wonder, why does this next person in line not have the talent I have? And it's because, most people don't have that kind of skill. So it's building the system. So what systems have you built in your business? Because certainly it's grown dramatically in the last few years that have can you name one that really kind of helped? Or was it just a series of little ones?
I honestly, the most dramatic system that has impacted my life and our business is the 411.
Okay.
As an entrepreneur, there are all these things that we could do. We're wearing a ton of hats. There's constantly fires that we got to put out, competing priorities. How do you know what to do? And how do you ensure that you're only working a certain number of hours, and that a pre-prescribed time, you shut it down and you actually go and live a life and be present? That's where the 411 has come in. Establishing the habit of every single week, updating our 411s so we have clarity on what our priorities are in our professional and our personal life. And then having our calendar match our priorities makes it very easy to say yes to the one thing and to say no to everything else.
So when you're determining, and you mentioned, well, Gary does in the book, these balls, some of them are glass, some are rubber. How do you determine, because I think it's easy to kind of generate things to do, but how do you refine to know what is the one thing? Do you have to look 10 years in advance and then go back and work your way back to today to kind of figure out what that would look like?
I think this is one of the greatest misunderstandings in the book. It's not that we only have one thing.
Uh-huh.
We all have multiple one things. You mentioned the 7 circles.
Uh-huh.
This is on page 114 of the book. It's the 7 most important areas of your life. Your spirituality, because every single one of us is going to ask, why are we here?
Mm-hmm.
You got your physical health, because if you don't have your body, where are you going to live? Your personal life, the things you do for yourself personally. You have your key relationships, meaning your significant other, kids, colleagues, so on and so forth. You have your job, meaning your role as CEO for Work the System, Josh. Like, that's your job. You have one thing for your job. Then you might have one thing for your business, for Work the System overall. They can be different. And then your finances. You take that focusing question, what's the one thing I can do for my spiritual life, such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or necessary. You aim it at any area of your life and you ask it enough times, you end up whittling it down to a 2-inch domino that you can knock over, that if you knocked over consistently would reach from the earth to the moon. Mm-hmm. And you do it every day until it becomes a habit. The challenge is people try to identify one thing for every circle or one thing for every area of their life, and they try to do them all simultaneously. This is the idea of thinking big and going small. You've got to make the mark of success on one thing.
Okay.
If you do that one thing consistently over time, it becomes a habit. You earn the right to focus on the next thing in terms of tracking as a metric. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So, well, let me ask another question about it. So if you determine your one thing is to have a great marriage, and you say, well, then the one thing I can do is eat breakfast with my spouse. That's what I'm going to do. And you do that. Then once you've earned that or done that, then you can move on to the next one. That's business. Or do you make them sequential? Or
it's in terms of what makes the day a win. So we have something called a 66-day challenge calendar.
Okay.
It takes 66 days to form a habit. You can only focus on forming one habit at a time.
Okay.
Try to do more. You'll see why you only get to focus on one. I went through this. When I first moved here, Jay said the fastest way for me to get out of business with him and Gary was to not live the book. And the book's about forming power habits, right? So what's the first power habit? And I identified I needed a habit for 4 areas of my life. Mm-hmm. And he asked me a question. If you could only choose one, which would it be? And I said, but I really need to do 4, Jay. I can do 4. He goes, Geoff, if you can only do 1. I said, I really need to do 2. I need to do business because I just moved my family across the country and it better be for nothing, better not be for nothing. And then I need to do 1 for my marriage because happy wifey, happy lifey.
Yeah.
And he goes, Geoff, if you can only choose 1. Jay, I can do 2. Geoff, the book's called The One Thing. Pick 1. I chose business. Doesn't mean I didn't focus on my marriage. It's that the power habit that I was forming and tracking on my 66-day challenge calendar was, did I check my 411 before I checked my email? And every day I did it, I put a red X on the calendar. Still tried to be the best husband. But the mark of success from a habit standpoint was whether or not I checked my 411 before I checked my email. You fast forward 66 days, that's a habit. I have a habit of thinking and acting in order of priority, and I earned the right to start tracking the power habit for my marriage. I needed to be present. When I walked in the house, did I put my phone down? If 10 minutes later I went and put it back in the pocket, still a win, still got an X. It was, did I develop the habit of taking phone out of pocket and putting it down? You fast forward, all of a sudden, I have a habit of being present at home. I earned the right to focus on forming a habit for meditation. And they start stacking over time. So this is about success is sequential, not simultaneous. One thing at a time.
I like that. Well, then people don't get demoralized because it is such a small domino, but the effect is massive. And I think that's the difficult thing with people trying to change their businesses and their lives is they understand that mastery of something big comes through the day-to-day interactions, because all you have is the moment you're in. And in any one moment, you can't really do anything that impressive in a moment. You can just do a small thing. And no, I like that. I think that's a great thing to focus in on. I've been kind of studying this book and starting to apply it. I can't say that I picked one thing to really focus on yet, but now I'm feeling inspired to do that.
There you go.
About it this weekend. That's good. Now, let's see. There's so many things to talk about. What I want to do with our limited time left. Okay, so let's kind of change gears in terms of, I mean, I know the folks listening to this, people I work with, a lot of times they are, obviously they're busy, they're distracted, they're wearing lots of hats. They are struggling to lead simultaneously, but things rob them of their productivity. So what things would you say rob most people of their productivity, and how do they kind of fight against those things?
Yeah. So there's four thieves of productivity that really rob us of our focus. The first is the inability to say no. We feel for some reason like we have to be in our inbox. We've got to get to inbox 0, or we have to reply quickly. We have to say yes to that meeting request. We have to say yes if someone asks if we've got a minute. Mm-hmm. Steve Jobs is a great example of this. He didn't turn Apple into what it was by saying yes to everything. In fact, when he came back as CEO, the time period between 1997 and 1999, he took the company from 350 products down to 10. That's 340 no's that he issued, not even considering the new ideas that were pitched. He understood to build an extraordinary company required that they look at everything that they were doing and start saying no to over 80% of it so that they could master the 20%. I saw it with Gary. Until my number one priority was done, I didn't earn the right to think about number 2 and number 3. We've got a massive opportunity to say no more.
Mm-hmm. What about the other one? So that's number 1.
Yeah. The second is this idea of the fear of chaos.
Okay.
If you imagine going into your time block, time with yourself to do your most important work, if you imagine that as a submarine, you step into this submarine, and the deeper you go in your focus on your one thing, the deeper the submarine goes down into the ocean. And for anybody who's ever dove in and tried to touch the bottom of a 10-foot pool, you know the pressure that mounts up, right? The deeper you go, the more the pressure mounts. You think the world just stops spinning because you're focusing on one thing? No, your inbox piles up more. People have things they need from you. They need it now. Your customer needs you now. Mm-hmm. And you will feel the pressure to just come up for air and go, let me answer my email. Let me go to that meeting. Let me handle that fire. Mm-hmm. If you want big success, chaos is bound to show up. People just lack creativity in dealing with it, or they're unwilling to deal with the chaos at all.
Okay.
And while it seems urgent, it's actually a thief from your productivity.
So it's about kind of training the outside world that actually I'm going to be in this space and life will go on and we'll clean up the mess afterwards.
Well, perfect example this morning. I had something that I needed from my partner, Jay Papasan. Yeah. I texted him and said, I need to talk to you. Do you have a few minutes between? And I only have the next hour available. Uh-huh. Most people would say yes. Uh-huh. I received a simple text message back. No. It was his writing time. That was his one thing. And shame on me for not having the foresight to anticipate what was going to go awry earlier. Uh-huh. The best part about your problem is that it's your problem, not mine. Uh-huh. I was trying to bring him my problem and take him off of his most important work. And the answer was simple. N-O, no.
Wow. So did you survive?
Yeah. You know what it did? It made me actually get creative and figure it out. Uh-huh. How many of us have people in our world that they bring questions to us, and because we want to be helpful, because we want to support them, we end up giving them the answer. Yeah, what you don't realize is that support can look a lot like saving if you don't have standards. We have a standard in our world. You don't bring problems without a solution.
How interesting. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the people I coach, this is their biggest issue as owners. And as the company gets bigger, it's the biggest issue of their operations manager or the general manager is they have a hero complex they can't get over. And so that's definitely a part of it.
Can we show an example of thinking big and going small, of a domino effect on this one thing? Because this is huge, right? We have this hero complex. Mm-hmm. There's a quote in the book from F.M. Alexander that people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures. So if you imagine the type of business you want to build, the type of impact you want to make, it's going to require that you master succeeding through others, right? That's like the 57th domino. That's Earth to the moon, that you've mastered succeeding through others. Well, what's the one thing you can do such that by doing it would make mastering succeeding through others easier or unnecessary? Well, first you got to be able to attract and retain great talent in order to succeed through them. Well, what's the one thing you can do such that by doing it would make attracting and retaining amazing talent easier or unnecessary? Keep them in your world. What's the one thing you do to keep them in their world? Coach them to their possibilities. What's the one thing you can do to coach them to their possibilities? Ask them great questions. What's the one thing you can do to ask them great questions? I whittled it all the way down to a 2-inch domino in my own personal life going through this, to ask one question a day when I naturally would have told. Just once a day could I prove to myself that when someone asked me a question, that instead of giving the answer, I say to them, I have some thoughts, but I want to hear yours first. What do you think? And I tracked it on a 66-day challenge calendar until it became a habit. And you fast forward less than 4 months, I became the type of person who asks great questions. And as a result of knocking that lead domino down, the possibilities of my people expanded dramatically. It completely changed my relationships with certain people. It even made me a better father. Because I have a 5-year-old girl who's as driven as me and as stubborn as my wife. She can be a great entrepreneur. And telling her to go to bed was like World War III. And one day it clicked. In my business, I ask questions. Why am I telling my daughter what to do? Daphne, how are you feeling right now? Tired? What's one thing you can do that would make that go away? Go to bed. Great idea. Okay, Daddy, good night. March, and put herself to bed. And I couldn't. I was like, you freaking kidding me?
Wow. That's amazing. You could do a parenting book next.
Yeah, we'll get there. So here's my question for you. Do you believe, if you are struggling with people bringing you their problems, or you not being able to free yourself from the business, do you think you can ask one question a day when you naturally would have told? And would you be willing to track it till it becomes a habit? You do that, oh baby.
Yeah, I think that's a key thing that I haven't focused a lot on, but people have all these ideas they want to accomplish, and then they end up trying too many at once. And then if they do pick one, this might not sound very exciting. Wow, so just one thing for 66 days, that means I'm only going to accomplish 5 things a year. But I think because of the sequence and because it's the most important thing, there's a domino effect with each of those things. And also you can still be present with your other stuff. It's just not tracked. It's not recorded. It's not you call it the power goal, right?
Power habit. Let's flip it. I want you who's listening to answer this question. Over the last 5 years combined, how many truly life-changing positive power habits have you formed in the last 5 years combined? What would that be for you, Josh?
I don't know. It's a depressing exercise. No, I think a lot of things, but I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I'm not just talking about little habits.
Yeah.
Life-changing, positive power habits.
Power habits. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about it a while to figure out.
Let's put it this way. Yeah. If you can't think of one, it's not a life-changing positive power habit. I've asked this to over 10,000 people, and the answer is anywhere from 0 to 2 pretty consistently on average. For me, before getting into business with Gary and Jay, it was 2. What's interesting is Jay and I had that conversation where he's like, Geoff, just pick one. And I'm going, but just one at a time. Like you said, Josh, that's like it's 66 days, 365 days a year, that I could only get 5 a year.
Right.
Well, I only did 2 in 5 years combined. And in my first year running this company, I formed 4. And what's really cool about this, there's something called the halo effect, that when you do the right thing, it topples over many things. Those habits, without any intention, started forming additional power habits.
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why I joined your membership group just a few weeks ago, is to kind of further dive into this. I think this is, I mean, I'm certainly taking some notes here. Hopefully those listening to this are, because what you teach there, this is not just business, this is personal life, this is everything, has a dramatic impact if you're willing to focus. Now, I know we're going late on time, but can you tell us the other two? Because I'm curious to know the other two things that you said about productivity.
Yeah, the thieves. So you've got the inability to say no. You've got the fear of chaos. Next, poor health habits. This is a silent killer, literally. It's a massive thief on your productivity. And oftentimes we take it for granted until we actually have a health issue and you realize how massive it is. And then the final is an environment that supports your goals. Most people's environment does not support their goals. It was not designed to support their goals. So we challenge you to really look at, what does your workplace look like and who is in it?
Okay.
You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. There are changes that need to be made.
That's actually the number one reason why anyone ever drops out of coaching with me is something dramatic happens with their health or their spouse's health. That is it. And that really does rob the productivity of everything in your life. If your health's not there, then you can't really perform anything well.
That's right.
So, yep. Well, good. Well, I hope everyone listening to this really learned a lot. Certainly I did. And I appreciate Geoff putting me on the spot there to kind of analyze what I do here as well, here to work the system, because the idea of mastering your systems is not a one-time thing. It's something you actually need to focus in on in a laser focused way. Using this one thing model is a great way to do that. So what's the one thing, Geoff, you want to leave them with as we sign off here?
We've talked about a lot of things, right? I think the biggest mistake people will make is, number one, the biggest mistake is they're just going to press pause or just go on their day without taking any action. So I'm going to really challenge you, out of everything that we've talked about here today, what's the one thing that you can do such that by doing it would make everything else easier or unnecessary? What's that 2-inch domino thing that you really can do? Like, can you ask one question today when you naturally would have told? Can you say no to one thing that's on your calendar? Just cancel it, or tell them that you need to reschedule and ask them to follow up with you in a few weeks. Just put it on them. Prove to yourself that you can live this on the smallest scale, because when you get that win, you're more likely to knock down the next domino. A lot of us allow the idea of perfection to get in the way of what's possible. We hope that you take that action.
Well, very good. Well, thanks again, Geoff, for sharing your wisdom on the topic of the one thing. And hopefully, again, the audience learned a lot. And you can check him out and more about the one thing on theonething.com with the letter 1 in the URL. And if you check that out, you also find a podcast I was on a few weeks ago where the tables were turned.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh.